All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get started. It's my pleasure to welcome you tonight. This is our last Our Universe Revealed lecture for this season. We will start up again next fall. And the Universe Revealed series is a series of public science lecture talks that are being given by both University of Notre Dame science faculty and Indiana University South Bend science faculty. And we've had a wonderful mix this year, everything from galaxies to thinking about things in our microbes. Tonight we're going to dive into the world of analytical chemistry. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Marya Lieberman. She's going to be our speaker tonight. She's an analytical chemist at the University of Notre Dame. And she did her bachelor's degree at MIT, her Ph.D. at the University of Washington. She's won numerous teaching awards, and then in 2019 was recognized as an eminent lecturer scholar by the American Chemistry Society. And she does really interesting work about how can you do complex, measure minute amounts of compounds that might require really fancy equipment, but how can you scale that in a way that places that don't have fancy equipment and don't have trained technicians can actually do those tests as well. So really making chemistry accessible to everybody. Tonight she's going to be talking about the opioid crisis, and with that I will turn it over to Dr. Lieberman.
Thanks, Lars. Thank you for the invitation to come and participate and to share some of the work that I'm doing and some of the insights that I get from my professional role with this problem that's really a problem for everyone in this community. All right, so I want to talk about the opioid crisis, and I'm going to sort of focus down on the crisis as it affects us here in Indiana, and specifically in the county, St. Joseph County. I want to start by showing my wonderful research group. So these are the folks that let me come pontificate on the stage because they're the ones who are making things work in the lab. So we're an analytical chemistry group. That means that we are interested in measuring things. And in about 2010, I became interested in measuring how many medicines that were being sold in sub-Saharan Africa were good quality and how many were bad quality. And so we developed some paper test cards that let us do rapid screening. And we continue to be engaged in that work. We're now looking at chemotherapy products that are sold in sub-Saharan Africa. And one of the things that makes this a particular problem in sub-Saharan Africa is that the countries which are trying to regulate the quality of the medicines in their markets don't have adequate resources. So the market is what I would call sort of a lightly regulated market. And when you don't have a lot of government regulation of a pharmaceutical, then it's often very difficult to ensure that what's in the market is what it says on the package. And that problem is even more serious in the US for the categories of drugs that people take that are not regulated. So, for example, things like nutritional supplements aren't regulated by FDA. And street drugs or illegal or illicit drugs, those are explicitly not regulated by anybody. And so I became interested in that area, that sort of lightly regulated product category, and we started working on that about 6 years ago. A student developed a paper test card that we could use to analyze the major components in street drugs. And then we started looking at other tools that are available, like the fentanyl test strips that I'm going to demonstrate with you today. And We've started doing work in the community setting, so we've worked with the coroner's office in Indianapolis, looking at the actual content of drug substances that are found at the scenes of fatal drug overdoses. And recently, in 2020, we started working in Chicago with a community outreach program that works with people who use injectable drugs. And that's an important difference between the coroner's office study and the study we did in Chicago, is that the people in Chicago were not dead. They were living, they were people who were drug users, but they weren't dead. And this is one of the basic categories of information we're trying to find out, is what kind of drugs are associated with fatalities? Are those different from the bulk of the illicit drugs that are available in a community? All right, so I want to just give you a really broad picture about how opioids work, and then I'm going to dive in and start showing you some molecular structures. But in the big picture is that opioids work because they're mimicking natural painkillers inside the body. So when you do some activities, so for example, for a lot of people, exercise makes you feel really good. And some people say, okay, you get a runner's high. There's other things that you do that make you feel really good. Maybe for some people, it's like you eat something that's really delicious. Okay, so those feelings that are coming from your senses are sort of they're interpreted by chemicals in your brain. Okay, and for the opioids, the chemicals that are involved are classes called endorphins and enkephalins. And endorphins and enkephalins bind to specific receptors in parts of the brain, and they trigger a whole cascade of activity in the brain. And among other things that happen are release of a neurotransmitter called dopamine, and dopamine is kind of the natural reward. Okay, when you do something that makes you feel good, that positive euphoric feeling is a signal that your brain is giving you some dopamine. Okay. Yes. Okay. So that's how things like the MET and enkephalin there. That's a very powerful neurotransmitter. It binds to the opioid receptors and triggers a lot of release of dopamine. And opioid drugs have similar shape and similar stickiness, and they're able to bind to the opioid receptors in similar ways. And they trigger similar consequences. So the problem, though, is that the opioids are generating those good feelings, but they generate them more and longer. And for many people, that is a really irresistible experience. Okay, so those feelings of pleasure translate into wanting to have more. Addiction is when you physiologically become dependent on something. Your body, in the case of opioids, the body adapts so that you need higher and higher doses to achieve the same effect. And then if you try to quit, very, very unpleasant feelings. Withdrawal from heroin or other opioids is very hard for people to go through. And one of the problems with opioids is that they also affect the breathing center in the brainstem region. So there's mu-opioid receptors down there, and if you have too high a dose of opioids, then you lose the urge to breathe. Okay, so you go into respiratory arrest, and that's the way that people die from opioid overdoses, is respiratory arrest. Okay, and there's other things that can happen, but that's the thing that's the makes you stop breathing. If you don't breathe, within about 3 minutes, you're going to start having brain damage. And yeah. Okay, so, well, I'm a scientist. Scientists like graphs, and so I had to show you guys a graph. And here, this graph has 3 lines on it, and I want to go through these lines and show you how they correlate with different waves of the opioid crisis in Indiana. So the green line here is the overall rate of death, and it's expressed as deaths per 100,000 people. So in this county, there's about 240,000 people. Okay, so if you see a number on this axis, multiply it by about 2.5, and that'll tell you about how many people we expect are going to die in our county from this cause. So you can see that in 1999, it was about 3 per 100,000, which would correlate to maybe 8 people a year, something like that. Okay, and here in 2020, this rate is now up at 23, which correlates to about 50 deaths a year. Actually, the number is higher in our county than in the state. Okay. This green line is the sum of these other 3 lines. There's a line for commonly prescribed opioids, which is the blue line, and you can see it starts out moderately and then kind of has a rise and this very long flat appearance, kind of plateaus. There's this green line that does not much for a long time and then suddenly takes off, and then it goes down again. That's the line for heroin. And then there's this other line, the purple line, which in 2013 or 2014 suddenly does this insane hockey stick behavior. Okay, and that is that's the opioid crisis that we're dealing with right now, and we'll talk about that. And the overall sum of those death rates is shown by this green line, and you can see that there's something weird happens in 2016, 2017. It kind of goes down a little, and then it goes up again. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about these 4 different phases that are associated with these inflection points in all these lines. So first, we have this initial rise of the blue line, which is, this correlates with a phase where pharmaceutical companies realized that opioid drugs were a big profit center, and there were a lot of activities that they did to increase sales of those products, and that worked. And that correlated to people becoming addicted to prescription opioids, and there were deaths because of that, and a lot of sort of comorbidities. That was noticed. People noticed when this death rate doubled, okay? And there were efforts to rein in the prescription mills. So even in 2015, the number of prescriptions of opioid drugs in Indiana was 89 prescriptions per every 100 people in Indiana, and that's like the whole population, so that includes like 5-year-olds. It doesn't mean 5-year-olds were taking opioids, but it sort of implies that there are some people who were heavily being prescribed opioids, or maybe the opioids were being sold or something like that. Okay, so once this rise in deaths due to prescription opioids was noticed, there are now efforts from regulatory sources, from the government, from law enforcement, to crack down on pill mills and to restrict the sale of prescription opioids. Well, now there's all these people who had been taking those prescription opioids, and it's really hard to quit using prescription opioids, just like any other opioid you might be addicted to. And so those people now found that they could get the same feeling from heroin. Okay, and so this marked a shift where people who had been taking prescription opioids now turned to street drugs and heroin. And there was a shift at that point. You have people who are new users. They don't understand the risks of using street drugs, which are often the content of the heroin could vary a lot from one dealer's product to another dealer's product. And there were a lot of deaths associated with that. Okay. In 2014 or 2015, something new started to show up. And this new thing was synthetic opioids, so things like tramadol and fentanyl. And we'll talk in a minute about why those were so hazardous. But this is a new product. We saw, when I started working in Chicago, was actually maybe 2017, 2018, we did some exploratory work with the Chicago Recovery Alliance, and we found that at that point, when people thought that they were buying heroin, they were often buying fentanyl instead, or heroin mixed with fentanyl. And that has really continued. So as of sort of 2019, 2020, most people who were using injectable drugs were not expecting heroin anymore. They were expecting fentanyl. And at that point, something else started happening that started to drive up death rates. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Okay, these emerging active substances. Okay, sorry, that was a long intro, but I wanted to make sure everyone saw this graph and kind of got all the juice out of it. Okay. Okay, so now we are well away from the era when most people are taking prescription drugs. They are taking street drugs, illicit substances, which are produced by people who are sort of by definition criminals. Okay, so I want to show you an illicit drug manufacturing setup. This is actually a setup that Interpol did a raid. These folks were making Viagra pills, not opioids, but this is the kind of setup that illicit drugs might be made in. There may be a pharmaceutical, this is a pharmaceutical coating machine here, but the setting that it's in and the way that the materials are being prepared and put in here this is not what we think of when we think of a pharmaceutical. This is an example of a drug that was collected in Chicago in September 2020, and it was analyzed by GCMS, not by me, but by these folks at Drugs Data. And this is what they found in this drug. And so this was probably being sold as tramadol. It's not clear what it was being sold as, just as blue tablet there, but mostly it's got acetaminophen, which is the active ingredient in Tylenol. I have no idea why that's in there. Fentanyl, tramadol, DXM, 4-ANPP, I don't know what those are. Lidocaine and xylazine, there's some xylazine. And, this whole long list of ingredients, okay? So I think keep this in mind. This is kind of the 2020s. When people are taking street drugs, they are not taking a well-controlled product. And that's what's contributing to our crisis. Okay, so let's go back to the illicit drugs and see what is the problem with fentanyl. So there's fentanyl. It's a rather simple molecule. So there's this sort of central region here, and attached to it there's two tails. There's this tail, and there's this tail. Okay, and fentanyl is a really powerful painkiller. It's really useful for people who are experiencing incredible pain. For example, if you have bone cancer, then opioids like this may be the only thing that give you relief from the pain. The DEA has strict controls on the manufacture of this product. It's a Schedule II material because it has very high addictive potential, but it also has medical application. And so they allow manufacture of a little more than a ton per year. Okay, now you also see here are some seizures here. This is just a tiny portion of the DEA seizures from 1 year. And of course, DEA doesn't seize all the illicit substances that are coming in to the country. Estimates are that it's less than 10%. Okay, and so you can see that the amount of illicit material that's being produced is probably considerably bigger than the legitimate amount of fentanyl that's being made in the whole US. Okay, and what that tells us is that we're not talking about diversion of commercial fentanyl here. We're talking about illicitly manufactured fentanyl coming in into these street drug supply chains. Okay, so why is fentanyl suddenly flooding the market? Well, because the fentanyl synthesis, this is one synthesis method for fentanyl. I know you guys are not chemists, but I'm just going to tell you that this is a simple 3-step synthesis with a high yield from easy to get precursors. Okay, so this means that it's cheap and easy to make, and there are people who are willing to do that and to sell it because you can make a lot of money this way. Okay, so that is the core reason. Why go to Afghanistan, negotiate with warlords to get opium, take that opium to Mexico and make it into heroin when you could just make fentanyl and sell the fentanyl? In some way, some drug dealer somewhere is like, this is the perfect drug. Okay, so that is the core of the problem, is that this drug is easy to make and cheap to make. And it's really addictive. Okay. And the other problem is that the lethal dose for fentanyl for a person who's not used to taking opioids is just a few milligrams. Okay, and this is just showing a lethal dose of heroin, several, maybe 100 or more milligrams might be a lethal dose. But for fentanyl, it's just a few grains. And of course, there are synthetic variants of fentanyl that are even more potent, and that means they're even more toxic. Okay, so the potency of an opioid drug is, in some sense, is related to how well it sticks to the opioid receptor. And so if you've got something that sticks to the opioid receptor, right? And remember, in your brainstem, the mu opioid receptors are telling you, hey, take another breath. And so if there's an opioid receptor that's turning that off, and you can't get it off the receptor, then that's really serious. So, okay. So that's why fentanyl is so dangerous. And I know where people are sort of used to thinking of fentanyl in the context of injectable drug use. Oh, it's those heroin users. They're the ones that are going to be exposed to fentanyl. That is not the case anymore. And starting in around 2019 and now becoming much more common are pills, pressed tablets that mimic common street drugs. So Xanax is certainly a legitimate pharmaceutical. A lot of people are prescribed Xanax for various reasons, but also people sometimes do buy it from whatever, a friend of a friend. These are M30s, which are oxycodone, and that's a painkiller. It's now pretty common for for street M30s to have quite a lot of fentanyl in them. And so this is an example, big bag of pills. that are, have a lot of fentanyl in them. Okay, so that's part of the reason that, that I have been working now with my, more closely with the Notre Dame student affairs people and the Notre Dame police, because I think that everybody is now kind of realizing, hey, this could be a problem. And it certainly, it's touched a lot of people in our community. So how many people? Well, we've come down quite a lot from the high prescription rates in 2015, but as of 2021, it's still about 18 opioid prescriptions per 100 people in Indiana. And for surveys, people report that about 3% of people admit that they're taking some kind of illicit drug. And so in our state, that is about 200,000 people, maybe 8,000 in South Bend area. Okay. And then for, of course, for injectable drugs, the self-reported rate is a lot lower. It's about 1/3%, which would still correlate to around 900 to 1,000 people in St. Joe County. Okay, it's a lot of people who are being affected by this. We do track hospital admissions. So in the state of Indiana, over 5,000 hospital admissions were related to opioid overdoses. And these are discharges of people who survived their overdose. Okay, and in South Bend, 212. And then, of course, we have had 95 deaths last year, which were identified as opioid overdose deaths. So nearly 100 people. Okay, I just want to give you a quick look at the designer fentanyl analogs. Here we have our fentanyl molecule, the Schedule II controlled substance. And the DEA has to explain what substance they're prohibiting. And so they give a chemical description of the molecule. And at that point, all the people who are making fentanyl are like, aha, what if I stuck a fluorine on this benzene ring? Now it's a different molecule, and it's not controlled anymore. Okay, so that kind of dancing around is the reason why we see all these fentanyl analogs. So for example, here, this ring has been fluorinated in all the different possible places. This ring has been fluorinated. You can put a chlorine, you can put a bromine. You can decorate it with multiple other groups. So these methoxy groups can be added. What if, instead of having this little chain here, which is some little hydrocarbon chain, what if we stuck a little ring on there? So all of these possibilities can and are being developed by bad people. They're bad people because they're selling them knowing that people are going to use them as drugs. And none of these substances have been tested in humans. We don't know if they're safe. At least fentanyl has been undergone testing to determine safety and optimal dose levels. But these drugs just show up, and sometimes there's a wave of deaths associated with one of these. The supplier that we buy our reference materials from is Cayman Chemical, and I checked, they had 417 fentanyl analogs available. So these are all substances that have been found in various points of the illicit drug supply. And now it's anyone who's doing analytical chemistry, like DEA, but also poor me, you're playing whack-a-mole. Okay, as soon as you develop a method to detect this guy, suddenly you've got to detect this one or this one. Okay, so very frustrating. Okay, this is also happening with other drugs. So, of course, benzodiazepines, this class of drug has tranquilizing effects. It's not the same as an opioid. Opioids produce a feeling of euphoria. But the problem is when the opioid lets you down, you feel really bad. And so the benzodiazepines may help smooth that out. Okay, in any case, there's many of these benzodiazepines. These are just showing 8 that are commonly found in the illicit drug supply. We found all of these in the drug supply in Chicago when we analyzed 125 samples. Okay, so yeah. And then this is a very simple molecule here, xylazine. So xylazine is a horse tranquilizer, and it is also being used in conjunction with other opioids, and has it's a sedative in humans. So what that often means is that a person might, if they overdose on a combination of an opioid and xylazine, then they might fall asleep and also stop breathing. And so that's a very dangerous combination. Okay, so well, what can be done? What are some things that we can do? So there's a medicine which is called naloxone. I have some here. This is the overdose reversal drug. Okay, so this is sold as a nasal spray, and there's it's very simple to use. So because my lab works with opioid drugs, we're all trained on how to use this. The training is very simple. It's and anybody who if somebody is using illicit drugs, or if they have a friend or family member who is using illicit drugs, then this is a life-saving thing that you can just put in your purse and have on hand. Okay, there's other forms of this drug that can be used. So the Chicago Recovery Alliance likes to use this injectable form. They're working with people who use injectable drugs and are a little less queasy about giving an injection. Okay, so, but this nasal spray is pretty easy to use. The active ingredient is naloxone there, and you can see that the structure of naloxone is really similar to morphine, which is sort of a standard opioid. Okay, so the naloxone can kick opioid drugs out of the opioid receptor, and that enables the person to breathe again. Okay. However, naloxone, because of the structure of the naloxone, it doesn't trigger the dopamine circuit. Okay, very weird, but it means that naloxone is not itself an opioid drug. It doesn't get a person high. It's not addictive. Okay, and in fact, it's doesn't stop withdrawal symptoms. So it's just there to reverse the opioid overdose. Okay. Anybody can get naloxone or Narcan. You don't need a prescription. So in 2016, their state passed what's called Aaron's Law, and that allows, basically it's an open prescription. So you can go to a CVS or Walgreens and ask for this, and you can get it. And the Good Samaritan laws cover the use of Narcan as long as you call 911. And then if you don't want to go to a pharmacy and buy it, you can get it in multiple locations in South Bend, and maybe I will ask Joanne, do you want to tell people what some of those ways are for people to if they wanted to get Narcan?
Yeah, so those, I'm with Nexus Neighbors, we
Yeah.
don't deliver to your home, but those other agencies do. Monty Unidad, AIDS Assist will actually deliver Narcan to you, but you can go in our app and request it from them. So we have it all set up, so all you have to do is just put in your address and they'll bring it right to you. But yes, every one of those dots on that map there is a nalox box where you can get Narcan 24/7, no questions asked, totally free. If in order for you to get one of those boxes, and if you would like to put one up, anyone can get one from the state. They subsidize all the Narcan distribution and those boxes. It's all free. But anybody can have one as long as you're willing to make it accessible at your location 24/7 and you're willing to restock it for free.
And then also, if you go to the county jail, there's a vending machine in the lobby that sells Narcan. So I think it's about $25. So, and I want to show you these fentanyl test strips. These are a tool that can detect fentanyl. And they can detect fentanyl in very tiny quantities, 200 nanogram per milliliter quantities, which are much lower than you would have in an illicit drug. And they work very simply. You hold the strip on the dark blue end, you dip it in a solution of the drug, and then if one line shows up, you've got fentanyl in the drug. If two lines show up, there's no fentanyl in the drug. And that's it. Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how they work, and then if you're interested, you can come up and you can try it out. Not on real fentanyl. I'm using a simulant. Okay, so this is sort of a side view of the strip, and maybe I'll open one up and pass around. I know we all did a fair amount of testing with lateral flow immunoassays during COVID times. Has anyone ever used one of those rapid COVID tests? Yeah, so this is what's inside. This is similar to what's inside a COVID test. And at the bottom of the card, there's a little, if you look at it from the side, you'll see there's like an absorption pad, and then there's like a little red area. And that area is called the conjugate pad. And it contains a dye. I really want to pass this around so people can see, but maybe at this point, if you want to come up and we'll start, I can talk and we can get ready to do the demo. If you want to just come up, I think that'll be better. Oop. Okay. Oh, let me just grab this. Okay. I'll bring this down too. Yeah, just group around the table. Okay. So if you want to try it out, just take one of those packets and just undoodle it. You can put the trash can go in that little box. And then there's this little strip inside. And then the strip has this is the area we're going to dip. And then there's the little red spot there. Okay. All right, so let's do a negative. We're doing a negative first. Yeah. Here we go.
Johnny Carson technique of opening the envelope.
That works. Okay. I'm going to just put some water in these.
Oh, it's just barely red.
Yep. It's just a small amount. So that red material in there is actually gold nanoparticles. So you are using nanotechnology here.
So in a fill form, you would have to actually bring this into solution. You have to grind
Yeah.
it up and then, okay.
Yeah, you would grind up a pill, put it in with some water, and then
Just water.
just shake
Okay.
it up. Yeah, just uses water. Yep. And then all you do is you grab it by there's like an end that has a little mitten icon or something, little hand, the dark blue end,
All right.
and then you just dip it in the water.
And not past that line.
Yeah, just hold it in there for like 15 seconds.
Flat or vertical?
Oh, it doesn't really matter.
Can just the very tip go in?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. We should have some
You
music.
can use this one.
Okay, so now, by now, you may see that there's some liquid that's running up the strip.
It's gotten
Yeah.
better.
Yeah, yeah, let it go. It's got to
Mine's
run
already
for,
turning itself.
it has to run for, yes. 2 lines means that there's no fentanyl. It's a negative result for this test, okay?
2 lines.
Yeah,
No, I got 2
pop
lines.
that down.
So I saw in a thing that somebody said NO is 2 letters and 2 means no.
Oh, that's
That
a
was
good one.
helpful for
That's
me
good.
because I get confused.
Okay, okay, so that's our negative test, right?
Right.
Okay, so now we're gonna do a positive test. So I have here a simulant. This is gonna give us a positive result. This is not fentanyl. This is a drug called diphenhydramine, which is found in Benadryl. So it's an over-the-counter
So
drug.
it's got 2
Okay.
phenyl groups. Is it right? Because
Yes.
fentanyl should be spelled PH. Maybe.
Exactly, and so this drug here is mimicking the fentanyl enough that it fools the antibodies on this test. So I'm going to put some little,
So we didn't have any false negatives.
this is, if you're looking for fentanyl and you're finding diphenhydramine, that is kind of a false negative. Yeah. This was
Well,
one.
the first test was everybody got negative.
Everybody
so
got
that was
a
good.
true negative,
Yes.
and now we're gonna get a positive test.
So we don't want this one, we want to take that one away that we used
That's,
before. right?
that's, yes, just remember, put your
We'll watch
strip
yours.
into
The X.
the one that has the plus.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the one that has fentanyl
They
in
did
it.
mark it.
If you need more strips, we have more strips here. These strips cost about 50 cents a piece. Okay, they're not expensive.
And you can get them in a big
Where do you
box.
get 'em?
so-
But
Yes.
you can get these from Overdose Lifeline, they're free. Anybody can order Narcan and fentanyl and test strips from Overdose Lifeline, the people who do the boxes.
Do they sell them at pharmacies or anything?
I don't think they do at present.
You can also get them delivered from those agencies.
Yeah, we order these actually, we got these from a harm reduction organization. They're out of their expired strips, which is why I'm using them for a demo here.
2020.
Yeah, so these are 3 years out of date, but they still work great, so. For at
This
least
makes
for
you
a
always
demo.
wonder about the, they'll
Yeah,
still work. Have some people throw that out and I'm like, no, it still works.
But this is for a demo, it's not real fentanyl, no
Right.
one's life depends on the results, so, yeah.
So is the idea that if someone is going to take drugs, that they would test it first to see what they're taking?
This is one of the ways that a person could get information that might save their life.
But let's say
Yeah.
someone has a real desire and a need for a fix, and
Yeah.
they see there's fentanyl in it. What is
Yeah.
the chance that they're not going to take it anyway?
Yeah, so that is a good question, and one of the things that people at harm reduction organizations do is they may counsel people, okay, it looks like there's fentanyl in this, so instead of taking the whole whack all at once, take a smaller dose of it, you know, and then see what the effect is on you. And that could be life-saving advice.
How long does it take for fentanyl to kick in if a person takes it? I don't know how they even take it, but
It's pretty fast, but I don't know, what would you say?
Yeah, if you're injecting, depends how you're using it.
Yeah.
And then gut injection's gonna be the fastest, and people have overdose in less than a minute.
Is it the same quickness with heroin?
No.
So heroin is much quicker.
No,
Oh, sorry.
fentanyl would be more quicker.
Oh,
Yeah,
fentanyl
yeah,
is quicker than
yes.
heroin.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
yeah.
With
It's much more
inject-
potent, yes.
Gotcha.
The affinity, fentanyl has about 50 times the affinity for the new opioid receptor. The heroin does.
Yeah.
So it, and it's also more hydrophobic, so it gets into the brain faster from the blood.
My only experience is the film Train Spotting, you know, where they inject and right away they have that. But so I don't know if that's
Yeah.
realistic or not.
I don't remember the movie that well.
I'd recommend you all watch it.
I did see that movie, but I don't remember.
Okay, so let's see, so did we get some, we got some negatives, we got some positives, right? So you see how easy this is to do, okay? simple thing. Okay. I'm gonna-
Easy, but making sure you're diluting it properly, right?
Yeah, there's some issues with possible false positives, but we haven't found a lot of conditions that cause false negatives. So if you're going to make a mistake, I'd
Yeah,
rather it
on that
be.
side, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so this is kind of what's going on when you use the strip. If there's no fentanyl present, then the conjugate material, that red material, is able to bind to the test line. But if there's fentanyl present, then the fentanyl kind of blocks it. Okay, and only the control line can turn red. So this is called a competitive lateral flow immunoassay. Okay, good. Thank you for, you guys did a good job on that. Okay, and so I will just skip over that. Okay, so I thought it would be interesting to just have, I've been talking for quite a while now. I wanted to give you guys a chance to talk, and I want to give you this question. What are some things we can do in St. Joe County about opioids? And there's no wrong answers, but we're going to kind of try and classify them in different ways.
Could I ask a different question
Yes.
first before we do this?
Yes.
Okay, so fentanyl is a synthetic opioid,
Yes.
and it was developed legally specifically to address severe pains or whatever.
Yeah.
So here's my being very naive then. How did it escape from the lab, so to say? How did it get to the outside, to?
That's a good question. I mean, I think.
People just kind of took it and analyzed it and said, oh, I could do this.
I think, well, okay, so that synthesis method that I showed, I found that in like 1 minute of Googling. Okay, so if you put together people's experience with a strong opioid like fentanyl and the ease of synthesis, that's kind of why it escaped. Yeah. Yeah.
So I've been reading about the genome and the genetic testing, and some people are more prone to addiction genetically.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, this is more of a research science question. I'm wondering if anyone's looking at CRISPR methods to take addicts and change their genetics so they're not so predisposed to addiction.
Wow. Okay.
I always ask weird questions.
Yeah. No. It's an interesting question. I don't know. So far, the only CRISPR application I know for humans is for what is it? It's no, not. It's. Well, okay, but we're not. I don't think we're doing that. We're not going to go there.
I think there was some CRISPR
Yeah.
for sickle cell.
Yeah, for sickle cell. Thank
But
you.
what I'm saying is
Yeah.
now that we're becoming more aware of genetics,
Yeah.
and personal genetics,
Yeah.
I could get personal genetics for $400.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if changing the person's genetics so they aren't predisposed to addiction.
Yeah,
is
it's.
a way of maybe solving the problem on an individual level.
It's an interesting idea. I mean, there's a big difference between being predisposed to something and being doomed. Okay, and if you even if you're not predisposed, it's still possible to be addicted. So I'm not sure if it's possible to turn off the addiction just like turning a switch. There are medical approaches to treating opioid addiction, things like methadone treatment that at least will prevent a person from going through withdrawal. And we do not have, if a person wants to get that kind of medication-assisted treatment, it's much more effective than other kinds of treatment, like just a therapy or something, or like be strong, don't take, that's not a very effective approach. And the access to medication-assisted therapy is not, does not meet the needs in this county.
So what do you think the gap is between what's being given? Is it 20% is available? We need another 80%.
That is also a wonderful question. I am actually working on a gap, what's called a gap analysis, and I'm working with Joanne on that and several other harm reduction organizations, but also like the county health department and the Memorial Hospital, just everybody who is impacted on downstream, right, from these opioid overdoses.
I can tell you what we know so far, but we don't know the answer to that question. I can tell you that our only methadone clinic has capacity for 500 people. It's always full and has about a 6-month wait list. And the next closest treatment provider is an hour and a half away.
So the waiting list is how long?
About 6 months for methadone treatment.
I know 6 months, but how many people are on the waiting list? If
Oh.
500 are being treated, then how many people are on the waiting list?
Yeah,
It's
that I
like
don't know.
Curious.
I don't know.
And we have people who come from out of town,
Yeah.
right? Because there's a lot of other places where there is no methadone clinic or no doc who can prescribe the medically assisted treatment.
Yeah, I heard that the outlying counties with small populations are even harder hit than we are.
Yeah. Yes, if you look at the opioid overdose rates in some of the rural counties, it's much higher than in St. Joe. That's true.
For the buprenorphine or the Suboxone treatment, we don't even have a list of providers in our county put together right now. That's where we are, getting this information. So we're working on that, to find out who is providing it and what is the need.
Great.
Just a question. I mean,
Yeah.
historically, a lot of the addictions started where they were prescribed painkillers for some injury or whatever, and then were overprescribed.
Yeah.
And then it's difficult to go through withdrawal, so then they find other means.
Yeah.
Has that kind of calmed down, or are there new addicts that have just heard about this is a great way to get high and go immediately to opioids?
It's hard to say. I mean, the Aaron's Law, which was passed in 2016, that is in honor of a kid who was at age, I think he was at 16 when he had a sports injury and was prescribed some kind of opioid painkiller, and then from there went into more hard opioids.
Tough to say that
Yeah.
there are new addicts that just sprung from deciding to try it, or were so depressed in life or whatever led them to start. Is that on an uptick, or is that?
The only thing I know about that is that
Yeah.
historically, 20% of people who were addicted to heroin started with pills, with prescription medicine. And the last statistic on that, which is probably not 2020, was that flips completely. So 80% of people currently addicted to heroin or fentanyl started with addiction to prescription medication. Yeah, I don't know where it is now. It's changing so rapidly as part of the problem. The statistics are far behind.
It's very hard to get access to the information, like how I was, trying to estimate how many people in this county are using injectable drugs, and no one is counting. And maybe it's because, I don't want to know.
And then a
So,
second question.
yeah.
My cousin quite likely died of fentanyl. He was doing all kinds of drugs, so we don't know exactly what was in the system at the time. But there's talk that even just marijuana, sometimes it's being laced with fentanyl. Is that a myth, or has that actually been found to be the case?
At this point, I've never seen a credible analysis that showed marijuana with a significant amount of fentanyl in it. But often when somebody is, if someone dies from a drug overdose and you do toxicology on their body fluids, then any drug that they've been taking, like marijuana residues, will hang around in body for weeks, right? And so if you have a sufficiently sensitive analytical method, you're kind of seeing like a picture of what this person took in the last 2 weeks of their life, and it could include lots of different drugs. I did some, the fentanyl test strips do work on, if you do a water extract on marijuana, so if that's a concern, then it's testable. So, yeah. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering, probably another unanswerable. I've been in recovery for 4 years, and I went to a rehab facility. And I'd say of the 40 people I was in there with, almost all of the heroin addicts relapsed and died. So I didn't know if there was any stats on people who seek treatment, like their survival, if that makes sense. So like people who get into recovery and then relapse, are there viable statistics out there for like a survival rate? Because I don't hear any good numbers. I never hear good numbers about us. So.
Yeah.
No, it's great that you asked that question, because the problem is that the statistics that we have been done on people who have not had access to medication-assisted treatment. So if you look at France, 87% of the people in France who have a substance use disorder have access to medication-assisted treatment. Anybody want to guess what it is in the United States? You said 15, good guess. It's about right. I mean, you know, we're trying to get better at it. But I throw that out there and say to people, are people in France really excited about getting off opioids and people in the U.S. aren't? Is that why that number is so different? No, that's not why that number is so different. It's because we have very poor access and tons of stigma about people getting access. In fact, go to an NA group and see how many people think it's okay to use medication-assisted treatment. Even among people in recovery, they don't think that's really clean.
I see more memes about Suboxone not being sober than it should be allowed. But yeah,
So,
even I see that.
In 2000, a study was done in Europe that showed that people who had medication-assisted treatment were likely to be clean, 90% of them clean 1 year after starting that treatment, or cleaner, not using illicit substance. And so because of that study, Europe made a dramatic shift back in 2000 to start making sure people had access to these medications that saved lives. But we didn't make that shift.
No. So we're very good. In closing, totally anecdotal. Everyone I did meet started on pills first. They started with pills, and then, because that prescription always runs out.
Yeah.
I was talking to the South Bend Police Chief, and he seems to think things have gotten worse now that Niles has opened up marijuana sales, that it's a gateway to more crime and more drugs. Do the numbers pan out for that, or have you found that's the case, that now that we have, the marijuana boutique business right over the line, has that caused more problems for us?
I mean, I think the marijuana isn't causing deaths, so.
But he seems to think
Yeah.
there should be a correlation of, then it escalates to other things. I don't know. Gateway.
I think that correlates
Yeah.
to the stigma, where the gateway drug was the 1990s scare tactic, personal opinion, but it just sounds like a police chief thing to say personally.
I mean, I think if it were opioid pills, like pain pills or something, I feel like that would have, there would be kind of a stronger connection, maybe, because we do know that, just because of the similarity in the chemical mechanism of those drugs.
Because he's
Yeah.
against having Indiana go to selling marijuana. He says it causes causes more problems with driving while under the influence and things like that.
Well, there still is not a good test for detecting whether someone's under the influence of marijuana. It's actually the chemically very challenging assay, so there's not like a field test like the tests that they have for alcohol intoxication. So maybe he's felt a little frustrated about that.
Well, there's a good
Yeah.
product idea for someone to develop.
Yes.
Well, that's a good point, but is there a field test for opioid?
Well, so one of the, so this kind of immunoassay test, you can actually make these for lots of different substances. So there are tests like this for heroin, there are tests for cocaine, so, and you can have a whole.
Take a swab of saliva, or how would you do that?
They are urine tests.
Oh, urine test.
Yeah, so pee in a cup and do. This is how a lot of workplace drug tests are done with these sort of panels of these immunoassay test strips. When they take the cup in the back of the room, that's what they're doing. So, all right. Any more questions? Or if people want to just come up and talk, I'd be happy to do that.
I did have a question also about the influx, where they're seeming to see that a lot of the fentanyls are manufactured in China. And is that also a myth?
That was, I think, was true in maybe the earlier part of the fentanyl influx. It is believed now that some of that manufacture has shifted to, for example, Mexico. Mexico seems to be a source of the formulated products, which means the ones that are pressed into pills. So the way that people track this is they look at the impurities in the relatively pure drugs that are seized by police, and that is a way to test like what kind of chemistry is being used to make those drugs, and also how good the chemists are. So.
And how different is fentanyl, for example, from methamphetamine?
Oh,
Is methamphetamine considered an opioid?
No, it's not an opioid. It's a different drug class. I haven't seen any information about in the U.S. like it used to be that we had a big problem with people making meth. And in fact, in some parts of the country, like in the West Coast, that's still a big problem. They have a lot of more meth fatalities there than we do, for some reason. Okay, but yeah, I haven't seen any papers or any warnings or anything about in-house kind of fentanyl synthesis, and it may be because the material is so much more toxic. If you make a mistake, you can inhale enough fentanyl to die. I mean, you can also kill yourself making meth. It can explode, yeah. So, yeah. That's a scary thought. So, okay, well.
So what do you think can we do about opioids then?
One of the things I would really like to do is to figure out what's happening in the community, in the illicit drug supply in this community, because it's really hard to get that information. And like if there's an unusual overdose at the hospital or something, they don't have the capacity to figure out like if it's a new substance causing that overdose. They have to send the sample off to the police lab, and the police lab has a big waiting list of other samples that they are analyzing for forensic purpose, to use in a trial or something. And so it can take a while to get information. Sometimes if it's a new substance, they may have to send that to the DEA lab in California. Or, but I'm an analytical chemist. This is interesting to me. I want to know like what these substances are. So I'm hoping we can start to take a closer look at what's happening right under our noses. Yeah. Yeah.
There's so many in the news that are coming across the southern border illegally, or many are being processed a little bit, but there's a lot of what they call, I think, gotaways that they don't even know where they end up, and some of them end up here in South Bend. And what my question is about the concept of snitching and how it's a pejorative word, and people in the various communities where there may be knowledge of illegal drugs, telling on them and trying to do so without getting whacked, for snitching.
I mean, my impression is that the drug supply in this area is not caused by like random migrants, that it's much more organized, and that there are sort of territories that are controlled by different groups that are, I don't see it as being this sort of informal or happenstance. Yeah.
So if you Google South Bend gang map,
Yeah.
it will show the different territories. At one time, there were like 22 gangs, and it shows, and the map moves. So it shows the territories of the gangs in South Bend.
Yeah, and I think that it's a nationwide, that map really needs to be a nationwide map, that the trade, yeah, I'm sure there is, but, for example, there, in May last year, there was a seizure, some guy was driving a truck with a large amount of fentanyl from Colorado to South Bend. We are, Indiana is the crossroads of the U.S., and that includes for this illicit drug trade, unfortunately.
Apparently there's a corridor from Detroit to Chicago that runs through here.
Yeah. Yeah, we're on some transportation routes, and so, yeah, we're stopping point, I guess. I didn't talk about xylazine, not much. Well, we don't know that it's in the.
Well, we know it's in 55% of the supply in Indianapolis right now. We know that we've had 4
Yeah.
deaths here last year.
Yeah.
So we know it's here, we just don't know what extent.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and it's showing up in the samples we collected in Chicago in 2020, 2021. So I'm sure that the amount has gone up since then. So there's a new xylazine test strip, which we are going to get some samples of in 2 weeks. So yeah, if you like, we'll talk about that. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? So
Yeah.
let's thank Dr. Lieberman. So a really timely talk and lots of things to think about. This is our last Universe Revealed lecture for this spring, but we'll be starting up again in the fall, so stay tuned. If you go to, you can either just Google our Universe Revealed Notre Dame, and that will get you to the website. You can get added to the mailing list if you'd like to get notifications. And I just wanted to do a quick run through of the different topics, wonderful topics that we've done this year. We started with galaxies, thinking way beyond our own galaxy, and information that was coming out about the James Webb Telescope. And then thinking about the world's largest microscope to see one of the tiniest particles ever, the Higgs boson particle. And then thinking about microbial infections and how important they are, but also some really cool technology about addressing them. So then we had a panel discussion of the Nobel Prizes from 2022, thinking about dark matter and how much we know and how little we know about dark matter. And then thinking about actually how our nervous system can affect the health of ourselves as well as our communities. Biochemistry, so thinking about how our senses at the biochemical level. Thinking about personalized medicine, so how our DNA affects the drugs that we take, which was mentioned today as well. Doing some math dancing, that was last month. And then today, thinking about opioids, which is a huge crisis, and thinking about ways, well, becoming more knowledgeable, but then also we need to think a lot more about this. And so I just wanted to thank the St. Joseph County Public Library. We've had a number of people behind the scenes who have made this series possible. At the University of Notre Dame, Santiago Schnell is the Dean of the College of Sciences who has really supported this program. Tammy Freeling, completely behind the scenes, but she's done all the marketing for this event in conjunction with the library, which has been very helpful. And then also Brenda Phillips, who's the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Indiana University South Bend, who's also been very supportive of this project. And then I want to give a shout out to Steve Tope. He's been here for every single one, behind the camera, making these videos available. And we've had over 4,600 views of these talks so far, and every week it goes up. So I put this together last week, and then this morning I checked and the number was up again. So if you missed one of these wonderful talks, you can go to the website, you can take a look at them. And I look forward to seeing you this fall. We'll do science of some sort, exploring all different kinds of fields. There's so much. It's so interesting. And thank you so much to Marya Lieberman for tonight. It was wonderful.